A wise woman once said, being a writer is one of the hardest jobs in the world. You have to know everything, because the reader is going to know when you get something wrong. That wise woman was my English professor, and it was through her I learned about Donna Tartt's The Secret History. Published in September of 1992, The Secret History was such a success that it pretty much founded the dark academia genre, of which there are countless descendants nowadays. Its ending, however, has confounded readers for decades. For those who don't know, the story's protagonist is one Richard Papin, a young man from California, son to parents who aren't his biggest fans. Looking for a way to escape the intolerable conditions of his current life, he moves across the country to the fictional Hampton College in Vermont. It is there that he encounters Julian Morrow and his Greek class students. Henry, the de facto leader of the group, is almost erudite, a master of several languages, a perfect student, and naturally, a psychopath. His followers consist of the twins, Charles and Camilla, the eccentric Francis, and the misfit Bunny. Throughout the course of the novel, Henry, with Morrow's guidance, manipulates the Greek class into killing Bunny. Charles grows paranoid that he's next on the chopping block and confronts Henry, armed with a Beretta handgun. A scuffle ensues, and our prospective character Richard is shot in the process. Henry gets control of the gun, and before anybody can stop him, he shoots himself in the head. Twice. Yep. Discourse surrounding the novel often centers around the whys of Henry's sewer slide. It is worth discussion, of course, but astoundingly, there's almost no comment on the inherent stupidity in the novel's climax. But trust me, it gets worse than even just that. For the most part, the novel is written extremely well. Richard Papin is believable. He, much like the reader, is manipulated into caring for and believing in Henry's judgment, despite the obvious red flags. You see, I've read this novel twice at this point. The first time was a couple years ago in my freshman year of college. At the time, I was completely sucked in, and had I been in Richard's shoes, I certainly would have fallen in with Henry and probably would have done everything he told me to. He's really that persuasively written. It's excellent. It's been a few years, however, and now I've reread it. From the outset, every dirty secret of the book can be traced back to its very first pages. Even the incestual relationship between Charles and Camilla is hinted at the very first scene in which they appear. And then there were a pair, boy and girl. I saw them together a great deal, and at first I thought they were boyfriend and girlfriend until one day I saw them up close and realized they had to be siblings. Now tell me what that could possibly mean. The author regularly alludes to Greek, Latin, and French, including different phrases in each of these languages, indicating her familiarity with them. The details of the crimes committed by the students are methodically planned out. The execution, the investigation following it, and the fallout from their actions are all written very well across the board. That then brings us to the reason for this video's existence. With every aspect of this novel done so well, to the discerning reader, Tartt's complete failure to understand the mechanics of firearms undermines the novel's impact in an absolutely catastrophic fashion. These problems don't start with Henry's climactic end, however. Instead, they start with a lot of tomfoolery. Once, when Francis found a Beretta and ammunition in his aunt's night table, we went through a brief spat of target practice, shooting at mason jars that were lined on a wicker tea table we dragged into the yard. But that came to a quick end when Henry, who was very nearsighted, shot and killed a duck by mistake. He was quite shaken by it, and we put the pistol away. This scene, like many others in the novel, exists as a form of foreshadowing. This is the same Beretta from the very end that Henry uses to self-end task. However, there's a bit of a problem here. I'm not a hunter, but I do live in Appalachia. So, guns are pretty loud. So loud, in fact, that even with a suppressor, it is recommended to wear hearing protection when firing one. Ducks, while not the brightest creatures on God's green earth, do have ears, even if you can't quite see them. They can actually hear quite well. Point being, if guns were going off in the general area, it's quite likely that any ducks would try to be just about anywhere else. Now, of course, maybe we have a duck that is particularly hard of hearing. That still doesn't explain that Henry accidentally hit a duck. Now, I get that it's an airsoft gun, YouTube, not real. But I get that this is an airsoft gun, but bear with me. Look at this real estate around here. Say I fire this in any given direction. What are the odds of me actually hitting some unfortunate wild creature? Pretty low, I'd reckon. No ducks were harmed in the making of this video. Even if I had hit something, I probably wouldn't have even known it, especially if I was firing way off into the boonies over there. This all said to say, Henry accidentally shooting a duck is so unlikely that it demands quite a lot of explanation and convenient factors for it to make sense. But wait, there's more, and it's all downhill from here. Firearms are absent from the story right up until the very end. So Charles storms into a hotel room where the rest of the surviving classes hold up. He and Henry scuffle, and a few gunshots go off. Let's clarify real quick just what we're working with. Beretta, in this context, is referring to an Italian handgun, quite likely to be a 9mm. You don't have to know much about any of that, except for the fact that 9mm is definitely enough to be significantly dangerous to a person. With that out of the way, just imagine with me. You're in a small one-bedroom hotel suite. An unsilenced pistol is fired 4 times. What might that sound like? Well, according to Tartt, it sounds like there were 4 pops in rapid succession, like a cap gun. But the thing is, it isn't a cap gun. It's a gun, if you will. As we've established, guns are rather loud, and that's even when outdoors. Even out here, it'd be almost deafening. Inside a tiny room like that, your ears would be ringing. You might even experience permanent hearing loss. Not a great time, but not according to this book. No, just 4 pops. Then, naturally, it so happens that our boy Richard has found himself possessing a new hole in his stomach. It takes him a while to realize he's shot, which is a fairly common trope I don't love, but it isn't egregious compared to the rest of this. And then, it's also not egregious compared to the fact that the wound is described as slightly charred. So that means he's received a powder burn. For that to happen, one of 2 things has occurred. Either 1, Charles was packing incendiaries, which would have a pretty different effect anyway, or 2, Richard runs up to Henry and Charles, pushes his stomach up against the barrel of the gun, gets shot, walks back to his seat, forgets about it, notices he's been shot, and all that because it is impossible to be powder burned unless you are shot quite literally point blank. Neither of those possibilities can really be described as possible, so that's another knock on the book. Bullets, surprisingly enough, are also not magic, and they do conform to the laws of physics. The one that hits Richard, however, doesn't give a damn about any of that. That is because Richard later says that the bullet drilled me clean through where it came in. Where it came in, huh? This poses 2 problems. The first being that this wound is not mentioned at all until this moment, which I'd wager most gunshot wound survivors would call BS on. You see, when a bullet exits the body, it tends to do so as deformed fragments of metal rather than the solid object it entered as. This typically has gruesome and rather painful effects. Not for Richard, though, I guess. He just didn't notice it. The second is that the book might be implying that it made a U-turn, with the line about it exiting a bit to the right of where it entered, without impacting any solid surface like bone. Seems unlikely. Now, it is time for the grand event. Henry's sewer slide, his Darwin Award, or what have you. I'll start by just reading the passage that details his demise. He put the pistol to his temple and fired twice. 2 flat cracks. They slammed his head to the left. It was the kick of the gun, I think, that triggered the second shot. It was the kick of the gun, you say? Now, once again, this is not a real firearm. However, it is made in simulation of one, and I can use it to demonstrate a point about why this isn't quite how it works. So, This is even a good example because it's hammer fired like the Beretta in the book. But this ain't automatic. Neither is any kind of Beretta, unless you're talking about the one that's in Call of Duty, which I kind of doubt that's the one we're working with here. So we'll give this a little bit of a demonstration then. As said, this is a airsoft gun, biodegradable BBs, absolutely nothing that could be harmed in this direction. But I'm using it to exercise a point. I'll even fire with my left hand so I can show you. See here, I haven't released the trigger. In order for me to fire another shot out of this weapon, I would need to fully release the trigger and allow it to reset. Now obviously this isn't a real gun, so it doesn't kick very much when I shoot it, but 9mm doesn't kick all that much either, and no aspect of the kick that this gun did have could have ever led me to accidentally fire it twice. And now I will physically demonstrate how I must have to fire this again. Let all the way go. You might have even heard that click if the audio is working well. And now it's fully released, and now that it's all the way reset, I can shoot again. So, firing twice in that scenario. Not what I would call particularly likely. So that was pretty bad, huh? I know you won't believe it, but there's still just a bit more. Henry died, of course. With 2 bullets to the head, I don't suppose he could have done much else. I think we're on the same page there, at least. Still, he lived more than 12 hours, a feat which amazed the doctors. Fellas, have you ever thugged it out so hard that you survived shooting yourself twice in the head? I mean, really. For 12 hours? I think that really defies any further comment. Oh, right. There's actually one more thing now that I think about it, and it's that Henry's ghost appears at the very end of the novel. It's kind of a weird scene. And when the ghost arrives, Donna Tartt has forgotten once again about the concept of exit wounds, because he's just got a little bit of redness right around here. But I guess they just bounced around in there like ping pong balls or something. I don't know, man. But normally what goes in must come out, and it usually goes out in a rather unpleasant way, we'll say. So what was the point of this exercise? To tear apart a 30-year-old book that I actually do like for messing up one singular subject? Well, yeah, I mean, sort of. But more so, it's to emphasize the importance of not disregarding any aspect of your craft. Clearly, Donna Tartt has no interest in firearms. I mean, her passions, as are even laid out in the book, are much more to do with ancient cultures and linguistics. And, I mean, honestly, that's fine. But when you're writing a novel, you have to get everything right, or some guy like me will come along 3 decades later, long after it actually matters, and explain how she got every detail about this one thing completely wrong. Huge stakes, I know. So if there's a lesson to be had, it's that it's worth giving your all to everything you do. Attention to detail will always be appreciated by those who care about what you're working on. So with this first video out of the way, I guess now I'll say this. This is my first video on this channel, though not my first on YouTube. I'm giving this a shot, and I'm having fun so far. If you enjoyed the video, I'd greatly appreciate a like and a subscription. If you're feeling generous, hitting that notification bell would help a ton also. I plan to cover a pretty wide variety of topics here, from novels to movies or games, even history at some point if I find topics that I know enough about. But really, it'll be whatever catches my attention. Feel free to suggest topics for me to look into, and I promise I'll read every comment. I appreciate you. Until next time.
Imagine if you hit a squirrel.
Imagine if I did hit a squirrel, right? So here. I didn't do the reset.